Yeah. Well, shall we begin? Or will we
Yes,
wait
yes.
other people for other member?
Oh no, we waited long enough for you, you see.
Ah, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, so the question will be this. And then the list. Okay. Okay. There will be 4 presenters today. Mbak Pipit with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Mr. Donald will with Day of Infamy by Walter Lord, and Mr. Fajar, son of Hamas, and I will present Toto Chan's Children, A Goodwill Journey to the Children of the World by Tetsuko Kuroyanagi. So who will be the first presenter today, Mbak Pipit or Mr. Donald? Mr. Donald first.
Donald first because I'm still eating.
Okay. Okay, you may start your presentation, Mr. Donald.
Okay, thank you, Gusti. But I have this very loud background noise. So sorry for the background noise. So now thank you for the opportunity for the questions from Gusti. What's the title of the book and what is it about? The title of the book that I want to discuss is Day of Infamy. And the subtitle of the book is The Bombing of Pearl Harbor. So this book is about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. base in the Pacific in World War II. And it is a very important event because it is the event that triggered the United States to enter World War II. Before that, they wanted to stay neutral. They didn't want to get involved in the war. But this is the event that turned them into joining the war. And this book is not about the political aspect. So it doesn't talk about the people, the politicians, except at the very end about the speech by the president. But other than that, everything is about the planning and the military attack itself. So the focus of the book is just one day, December 7th, on the attack itself. It doesn't talk much about the event before or after or the political aspect of it. And the second question for discussion, can you please give us some brief information about the author? The author is Walter Lord. I do not know much about him, but he was a famous historian, from what I know, and a very good storyteller. So for this book, he interviewed hundreds of people, so first-hand accounts. That's why this book reads like a novel or a thriller, despite being a non-fiction. Because the historian, Walter Lord, interviewed hundreds of people from the high rank officers to the lower ranks, everything in between from both sides, the American side, the Japanese side, and combine everything into one book. And I already read another book of this previously that I also discussed a few months ago about the battle at Midway. So that is one series about World War II. The Battle of Midway happened in 1942, and this book, the event took place in December 7th, 1941. And the third question here, why did you decide to read the book? Because these days I'm learning a lot about history, and I especially like Walter Lord's book. So with so many options for history books, I actually prefer this book because it reads like a thriller, as I mentioned before. I already read Midway, The Battle of Midway, and it was very good. So I was eager to read another book of his. And this is a prequel actually, because this is about the attack at Pearl Harbor that happened before Midway. So I'm learning history, and I really like the storytelling skills of the author. That's why I decided to read this book. What are your key takeaway from the books? So one of my takeaways that what we knew about, or me, what I knew about the attack before I read this book is nothing compared to what is written in this book. Because previously I only read maybe like summary or maybe watch movie. In the movie you can only get a glimpse because you have limited time in a movie. You can only, you have 1 minute for 1 minute event, right? In a movie, you have 5 minutes for 5 minute events. But in a book, you can dig deep into different aspects, describe the feeling. So it's much richer, in my opinion. So that's the power of a book. The first thing takeaway. The second takeaway is about the, actually there are many that we can learn from this book. The second takeaway is the extent to which the Japanese use deception. So they did everything possible to deceive the US to have a surprise attack. So for example, when they, maybe about 1 or 2 weeks before reaching the destination, 1 week I think, they already had radio silent. So no more communication between ship with radio. They turn off electricity at night, even still very far away, blackout. And they use radio traffic to give the impression as if the ships are still at the base. They even put someone, radio announcer, who is known to the American spies, the intelligence officer, they put it in such a way that this person give the impression that all the ships are still at the base. And another one, they use the highest grade of fuel, the most expensive one, to minimize smoke. So they did everything to minimize detection. So I never knew this kind of thing before. The Japanese did all this to have a surprise attack. Also, the preparation from the Japanese side is very good. So for example, before the attack, all the pilots, they had a quiz. The officer will show silhouette of a ship, black and white. What ship is this? Oh, this is Oklahoma ship. Okay, what is this ship? So they need to know the US ship one by the silhouette. It is drilled by the officer, so that they know what they are targeting. So the preparation from the Japanese side is impressive, in my opinion. On the other hand, from the US side, at that time, they were very much unprepared. Actually, the radar officer was detecting the coming planes, but they dismiss it. Oh, these are just the carrier. They have training. So very prepared on the one hand. On the other side, the US, they were very unprepared. So the second takeaway is that we need to be prepared for possibilities. Just 1 week before the attack happened, the admiral in charge of the fleet asked the intelligence officer, what is the chance for a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor? And the officer said very confidently, nah, zero chance of a surprise attack. Just 1 week before the attack happened. So that's another takeaway. One other takeaway is how difficult it was, the aftermath of the attack, because so many people were trapped in the ship. So the book spent quite a lot of time on getting these people out, because they were in a ship and the ship is turned upside down. So the floor become the ceiling and the water is coming in. They had to be rescued from the outside. So there is a lot of stories about rescuing the people who are trapped.
Mm.
The attack was very successful for the Japanese. Very few casualties. So the takeaways from me is about the preparedness and unpreparedness on the other hand, and about the human stories in between.
Mm.
And number 5, is there a question that you'd like to discuss? No. Yeah, so that's all. And now the Q&A session. Dr. Gusti, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Donald. Anyone have a question for Mr. Donald about the book?
The book talk about what leads to the decision to attack Pearl Harbor.
Sorry, it's very loud here. The book talk about what? Vivian?
The book talk about what considerations that lead to decision to attack Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Yes, the book talk about that. The decision maker is Admiral Yamamoto. Admiral Yamamoto was the highest officer of the Navy, and he didn't join the attack itself because he was the superior. At the time, Japan was expanding in Asia. They conquered many areas and regions in Asia, including Indonesia. They defeated the British and then the Dutch. And at one point, 10 months before, so February 1941, the admiral discussed with the staff and he said, we cannot win the war in the Pacific if the US intervene unless we cripple their fleet at Pearl Harbor. And the best time to attack them is now. So it is like a preemptive. Because they were expanding in the Pacific, the only power that could intervene was the US Pacific Fleet. Therefore, they did it preemptively before the US could intervene. They want to cripple the fleet. That was the decision, but they still negotiate. They still negotiate, and the final decision was made on December 2nd, so only 5 days prior. The fleet was already on the way. They were already, but nobody knew where they were going. So it was one part of the book, quite funny, because they were already in the sea for days, but nobody knew except the highest officer where they were going. So they have like guessing among themselves, where are we going? And they were told only a few days before, after the final decision was made.
Okay.
But I have another follow-up question. First of all, what made them feel so sure that America was going to interfere, while clearly America said they kind of stay down that time, right? America was not interested to be involved in World War II that time. What made Japan felt so sure that America was going to interfere? Number 2, I heard that Japan somehow has this delusion that they were actually stronger than the United States. So United States was somehow seen as more inferior than Japan, and they were wrong. So their guess was wrong. So which one is it that number 1, what made them so sure America was going to interfere, and second, what made them think that America would not beat them back?
Yeah, thank you for the question. For the first question, what made them so sure? In the book itself, it is not explain why they are so sure. What my conclusion is that they just want to make sure that nobody could possibly intervene. So nobody has the strength to intervene except the US. So at that time, the US was not interested, but nobody knew. Maybe 5 months later, 1 year later, the US wanted to intervene. So they decided to preemptively attack first because the only power that could possibly intervene is the US. So despite no intention at that time, they crippled it first. Because the first question, and the second one was, did they think they were stronger, right?
Yes. How come they were so delusional, thinking that they were stronger than the US or that the US would not beat them back?
Yeah. So at that time, the Pacific Fleet was not very strong. The US only had 2 carriers in Pacific. Japan had 6. So 6 compared to 2 carriers. And luckily, at the time of Pearl Harbor attack, both carriers were away, so they were not attacked. But actually, the Japanese respected the strength of the US. I didn't get any impression that they underestimated the US. In fact, it's the opposite. Because they were so strong, they had to be crippled immediately and in a surprise attack. So that's the opposite. They didn't underestimate, but they, because of the opposite, because they talk highly of the capability, they decided that they had to attack first and decisively.
But surely they know America was going to balas dendam. So,
Payback.
it was a very bad decision, don't you think? Or do you think it was a good decision, Temo?
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, of course, it is a bad decision, but we are not in the right position because we are many years later, right? It is different from someone who is inside the situation. So because we have the benefit of hindsight, of course, we can say it is bad decision. But for someone who is there, we cannot be sure because there are so many resources. For example, oil fields. They have to conquer all these resources. And indeed, even after the US intervened, it took many years for them to defeat Japan. So Japan, at that time, it could be a good decision for them at that time because they conquered the resources and they had a lot of benefit at that time. Again, when we think in their position and not using the hindsight of history right now.
Okay, any other questions? I have a question. Does did the book talk about kamikaze? Like, I once heard the rumor that, like, at that time Japan used a propaganda to make that kamikaze is something like heroic in the mind of the public. It's something heroic, but then I heard that actually, like, Japan chained the pilot to the what is it, to the plane, to the jet, so they cannot escape. Is that true?
Thank you, Gusti.
Yeah.
Kamikaze happened later in the war when the Japanese was losing. So I think kamikaze happened only in 1944, something like that. And this one is 1941.
Oh, not so. Japan didn't use kamikaze to attack Pearl Harbor.
No, not at all.
Oh,
We thought it was that one.
yeah.
No, instead they use superior torpedo. So they use technology. They spend a lot of time, the engineers, to make sure the torpedo is effective. Because at that time, torpedo was still in infancy, and Japanese torpedo was better than the US. Because they make it more effective. When you launch the torpedo could hit the target. So they use this kind of technology. And
I
also they have good better pilots, more effective dive bombing,
Ah,
kamikaze. They want to reserve the human resource.
I see, I see, I see.
But this question remind me of something in the book that I just knew. Actually, is on the other side, Gusti. The American side shoot down many of their own pilots.
What? Shut down?
Many of their own pilots.
Yes.
Yes. So the American side, they shoot everything that fly. And some planes are actually US planes.
Oh, why?
Yeah, yeah, I think I've heard of this. I've watched the documentary. Yes, yes.
Why?
Because they didn't know.
They shot blindly, right?
Oh,
Yeah. So at first they were surprised. And after that, they were angry. And when they were angry, they keep firing non-stop.
oh my God. They
So
can
some planes,
differentiate which plane is from the enemy and which plane is from their own ally.
yeah, so it's quite sad.
Oh my.
Some planes are actually shoot down by their own defense. Wait, I'm a friendly plane, but then the person died. US pilot, so it's quite sad.
Oh my God.
There are several planes like that. Some planes come from the mainland, from the US, California. The other planes come from carrier, so they have carrier. The carrier have some scouts and they want to land in Hawaii, but when they came, they got shot down. Some of them can survive, but many get shot down. Some of them get shot down.
The attack of Pearl Harbor is the event that led American bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right?
Yes, but 4 years later.
Oh, 4 years? Oh,
Yes.
oh yes, 41. Ah, yeah, maybe this question will be answered by Mbak Pipit, yeah, because I'm questioning why, like, the Japan attacked the military army, right? But why the American decide to attack the civil the civil people? Yeah, that this is I'm questioning about that. Maybe Mbak Pipit will answer it. Okay, thank you for your answer, and it's really interesting, Mr. Donald. Okay, so if there is no more question for Mr. Donald, we can move to Mbak Pipit.
You sure there's no question from Fajar?
Present Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Oh, Mbak Pipit or Mas or
No. I would like to because
yeah.
in this book there is a motive from the Japanese to do Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell from the other side.
Yeah.
But is there a question from Fajar to Donald?
No.
Yeah, so I'm discussing the beginning of the Pacific War, and Pipit discussed the end of the Pacific War.
Yeah, the end. Okay, but however, this book also talk about Pearl Harbor, actually. So that's what I like. Oh, the book is quite short, but very comprehensive. Okay, so is it me now, you see?
Yes.
Okay, so let me check the question. What's the title of the book? What it's about? Author, decide why, takeaways, question. Okay. So the title of the book is Hiroshima and Nagasaki by R.G. Grant. So I will just get the author out of the way. It's not a famous author at all, but he specialized in Penguin language books. So the books for school kids, basically, and then he wrote many important historical moments, and then presented in a easy English, basically. Yeah. But what I like about this Witness to History is they use diaries of many different people, from president until just ordinary people. So it's somehow interesting to be the perspective added into the story. So and also they had a target to read 12 books, which I'm behind the schedule. That's why I chose 10 books, then 70 pages. This is the reason. Okay. So and I don't know why I chose Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was like there are other 40 other titles, but this one somehow interested me because there was a debate in my class about US should drop the second bomb or not, basically. So Hiroshima, it was understandable, right? Because they wanted to end World War II immediately. So, and if there was no Hiroshima atomic bombing, then the US would have to invade by land, which would cost a lot of people's lives from both sides, basically. So it was a difficult decision. For Hiroshima, we get that, we understand. But the debate in my class is why they had to drop the second bomb on Nagasaki. Because Japan was going to surrender anyway, why they would want to drop the second bomb. And there's also a discussion about that. That's why probably why I wanted to read this book, because of that debate in my class. Okay. So the key takeaway, there are so many, I cannot wait to share. First of all, when Donald said these people who were on board the ship, the Japanese ship, didn't even know why they were there and where they were going, right? The same happened to the pilots who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. So these pilots who were given assignment to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, they did not even know what type of weapon they were going to drop. So they thought it was just an ordinary bomb, basically. So, but then something unusual though, they said we will record your response. We will record the process of your reaction, basically. So the head of the operation of the mission said we will record your reaction. So then they were wondering why they want to record my reaction. Is it just an ordinary bomb, right? We do this many times. But then they just realized after they dropped the bomb, then the scale of the destruction and all of this, the mushroom thingy, that was the first time the pilot actually saw it too. Like they didn't even know what they were dropping. Only the head of the mission knew about the atomic bomb. So that is what's interesting. The similarity between the Pearl Harbor attack and the atomic bomb, the first atomic bomb attack, is the lower rank officers did not even know, including those who actually actively engaged in the situation. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing is that the motive for the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor was because the U.S. stopped the import, the oil export to Japan, basically. So that time, Japan already started to expand to a lot of different Asian countries or areas. Yeah, there were countries, different area in Asia, and then U.S. wanted to stop that, but passively, not interfering with military, but they stopped the oil import to, they stopped the oil export to Japan. That's the same thing for stopping them, because Japan depended on the import, the oil import, basically. So after the US decided to stop the oil export to Japan, then Japan decided to attack. Okay, so that was the story from the other side. Another interesting thing is about, there's a city called Kokura. Kokura. Okay. So have you ever heard of the city called Kokura in Japan? Okay. So the second target of this atomic bomb was actually not Nagasaki. It was a city called Kokura. However, this city was very got cloudy very quickly. So the plane was about to drop the bomb, city. But suddenly there was thick cloud just shrouded the city, basically. So then the pilot said, okay, we're going to find the next target soon. Otherwise, we're going to run out of oil or run out of the fuel of the plane. Right? So they just randomly chose the next city, which was Nagasaki, such a poor city because they were not even the target. But they just become the secondary, the alternative to Kokura, because Kokura was shrouded in cloud. Now that time, Nagasaki was also clouded with this cloud thingy, but not as thick as Kokura. So still the pilot could not see what was under there. So he used approximate, or maybe the city is hit. So the second bomb was actually dropped 1.5 mile or 7 miles inside the city, not at the center, basically. So that makes the victims of the atomic bomb in Nagasaki not as many as in Hiroshima, because it was not dropped at the center, basically because of this cloud. So I think the story of the city of Kokura would be interesting. If I go to Japan someday, I will go there just to show that, oh, people, this supposed to be Nagasaki, but this city for some reason was saved by this um, celestial cloud, something like that. And the Nagasaki for some reason also can be said as safe, yeah, because the bomb was not dropped in the center; it was actually outside the city. So that time, that was the interesting. And there are so many interesting. Like, what does it take to make the Japanese surrender? So if you imagine Japanese, they rather die than surrender, right? So that's why this is one of the biggest reasons why they dropped the atomic bomb, because Tokyo was already burned to the ground. Tokyo was burned to the ground, and then these American soldiers and allied were like stunned, because how come they did not give up? You know, after everything was destroyed, burned uh, for 600 hours, but they were still wanted to fight. So they just could not get it wrapped around their head. That's why the last choice was to drop this bomb. Now, another thing is that these Japanese soldiers told the civilians to kill themselves rather than surrender. So it happened many times. So when they said these American soldiers were waiting, they did naval blockade. They say, right, on Okinawa Island, and they were surprised because when they arrived at the island, they just saw these people jumping off the cliff by themselves. So without even, they'd rather die rather than being a prisoner the of the enemy. And then these Americans, when they arrived on the island, they were like surprised by this horror situation when a lot of people just killed themselves in droves. Yeah, many of them jumping off the cliffs. Some of them because they have to, the military forced them to, or some others because they believe that is to defend their honor, they have to die rather than to surrender. So it's very interesting the way they view death as lightly as that. And last thing that I would like to share is about giving up. So even the debate that happened in the Japanese palace that time about giving up, the military leaders still did not want to give up. So they even almost killed the Hirohito, the emperor, because they what is it called? The wanted to stage a coup, basically, even against the emperor, because these military leaders did not want to give up. Finally, the emperor decided, okay, it's time to give up because he could not see more people die, more Japanese die. So he announced it in the radio for the first time. You know what's funny? It was the first time for Japanese people to actually listen to his voice. It was the first time for Japanese people to listen to the emperor's voice. And they were like, so, although the message was about surrender, that Japan surrender, but people were somehow stunned with, oh my God, that is the voice of the emperor himself. Heino, we call him Heino, right? The emperor, the descendant of the sun himself. So even though the content of the message is so sad, but they were so happy at the same time because they could hear the emperor's voice. And another thing that was funny is that the emperor's language was so refined. Like maybe here it's like Homo Inggil or something in the Japanese. That a lot of people did not even understand what he said. When he announced his surrender, there was like this minister spoke after him after that. And then after the minister spoke, then people realized that, oh, it was the call to surrender, basically. So because his Japanese language was so high level, people did not even understand what he was saying. But they were amazed by his voice. Well, there are so many things I could have shared, but I don't think the time is enough. But the intrigues about the second bomb that was dropped on Fokura, but now in Nagasaki, was actually used show off the power of the atomic bomb to Russia Stalin. So that time USSR was led by Stalin, right? So Stalin wanted to turn Poland and Eastern Europe to be socialist, just like that. So this is something that the Allies, UK, America did not want. So somehow the second bomb was used to show off to Stalin that we have this amazing weapon. So don't mess with us, something like that. That was the book insinuated that was the reason why the second bomb was dropped. Okay, so that's all I can share. Thank you.
Wow. Really interesting presentation from Mbak Pipit. Like when you talk about the book, I feel like, wow, yeah, wow, like seeing a movie. Yeah. So any questions for Mbak Pipit?
If you have question,
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe can you explain more about did the Japanese really want to surrender after Hiroshima? Because I think another opinion is that because they still didn't want to surrender, they did a second bomb, something like that.
It's true. That's part of the debate. They dropped the second bomb because the Japanese didn't want to surrender. However, it was days that don't know. And there were no internet. There were no. So that time after Hiroshima was bombed, the emperor sending some of his envoys to go to the city to check the scale of the destruction. So basically, the emperor within 2 or 3 days did not even know the scale of the destruction. So how can we expect them to surrender? You know what I mean? So I think although, for example, they decided to drop the second bomb, they should have given the Japanese government enough time to actually assess that, okay, this is no joke, right? No time at all. Even this envoy that was sent by the emperor to Hiroshima has not even arrived yet. Then so it was a really unrealistic expectation to make Japanese surrender right there and then in 2 or 3 days. So I think that's another thing. However, there are a lot of justifications about this Nagasaki. They said most likely with Stalin thingy, right? The second one is the scientists somehow wanted to justify the budget. It took a lot of money, like $1 trillion or something. So these scientists were somehow pressurized to invent the greatest bomb ever made. So they somehow wanted to show it to the world that, this is like something that you should not mess with this. So that's why, to justify how much money they spent to research the Manhattan Project, to research this bomb, they decided to drop the second bomb. And what I like is my favorite president, President Eisenhower. I like one of the U.S. presidents that I really like is President Eisenhower. He actually one of the people who what is it called? Objected, or they disagree with the dropping of the bomb. At least the second one. He even wrote in the newspaper, wrote to the Congress that the implication of what it will bring. He even talked about the possible arms race, nuclear arms race, which is too happened after that, right? So I like Eisenhower even more after reading this because of his stand.
Okay. Mbak Pipit, why Hiroshima and why Nagasaki? Oh yeah, why Hiroshima and why Tokura?
Yes, that's also a very common question. Why Hiroshima and why Tokura? Because other cities in Japan have been flattened, basically. So a lot of big cities, other big cities, have been flattened to the ground, bombarded. Yes, bombarded, with naval blockade, all of these things. So they wanted the Japanese to see the scale of destruction by choosing the city that is not yet destructed. That was not yet destructed. So that time Tokura, Nagasaki was Nagasaki, but Hiroshima and Tokura at that time were still fairly intact. Has never been dropped with bombs just yet. So they want to show the actual impact of the bomb by choosing that.
So actually, from the beginning, they have already targeted the civilian.
Yeah, that's actually another debate about this because the debate here's the thing. The president that time, President Truman, wrote in his diary that okay, we're not gonna attack the civilians, so you don't have to worry about mothers, women, and children, things like that. But then the book said that he was trying to not lying to himself. He could not face the reality of President Truman. So even in his diary, he somehow consoled himself that no, I'm not bombing these civilians. I'm not bombing these women and children. So only military targets. Even though he knew exactly that the bombs actually dropped on a city full of civilians. So even the president himself could not accept that reality. So yes, they knew for sure they dropped it on civilians.
Maybe have you learned about like the reason why the Japanese didn't afraid don't afraid to die? It's not afraid to
The
die.
samurai, is Bushido.
Yeah,
Bushido, the way of the samurai,
yeah.
is honor. So honor, you don't want shame, basically. Rather die than shame. So shame here, losing, surrender. That's why Japanese treat losers very harshly. Japanese treat losers very harshly, even to this day, right? So you notice this, right? Because we learn Japanese. So makenai, for example, you makenai, right? There's no way they don't want to lose at any game, anything. So I think it's from the Bushido somehow translates into the. They are harsh to losers because they're also harsh to themselves when they lose. So no pity at all to these people they occupy or they colonize. Like you heard of the story of how Japanese people they colonize, right? In Indonesia, Manchuria, everywhere, because that's how they treat losers.
But is there any any discussion about when does the value of the Bushido that teach them you'd better die in honor than live in sin?
I have not, but I have a book on Bushido. I plan to read. I don't know why. But when I read that book, I share it.
Okay.
Bushido, the way of samurai. Maybe they talk about how this philosophy came up.
Yeah. It's so scary. It's so scary. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your answer, Mbak Pipit. Mr. Fajar, do you have any question for Mbak Pipit or other audience?
Actually, I'm curious. Why does it seems Japanese don't have revenge to USA for bombing two city?
Well, they didn't have any means to. First of all, they did not have enough oil to revenge, right? There was a ban on the oil export to Japan. That's number one. Number two, they realized how many people died already in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So from the emperor's speech, it was clear that they had to surrender, but they cannot see more people, more Japanese die, basically. So that's the, I guess the bomb works. Give them the shock therapy.
Yeah,
Oh, I mean, nowadays Japanese people are forgiving toward USA. They don't really,
After this, Japan became the ally of the
yeah,
US.
become the ally.
So Japan became fast-growing country, partly because the US helped them economically.
Hmm.
So after World War II, Japan got a lot of money and investment from the US, basically. And then it was like a politic balas budi, same thing. So that's why Japanese somehow also felt indebted towards America.
Hmm.
Until now, they still have the military naval base in Okinawa. So they are totally still US ally.
Okay, thank you.
Any comments if still have time? Yeah, I think about Fajar question why the Japanese didn't revenge. One of the key factors is because the American, actually the General MacArthur, decided to treat the emperor well. So the emperor was not convicted of war crime. All the generals were convicted, but not the emperor. So the MacArthur decided to spare the emperor. So I think that is a key factor to calm down the Japanese. And about, I forget what I want to comment about. Oh yeah, about why they decided to drop the atomic bomb. I think from what I learned, one of the key factors is they want to spare American lives. Because in Okinawa, it's just a small island. They lost so many people. I just looked up, they lost 12,000 soldiers just for a small island. So eventually the president had to make a trade-off. We have to kill civilians, but if we do not kill the civilians, then millions of Americans will die. So they have to make this trade-off. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Complex decision ya.
Yeah, about keeping the emperor on the throne, it was also a debate even between allies. So the allies actually want unconditional surrender. So Japan did not have any right to, can we keep the emperor, please? They didn't even have any right to say that. But the ally think that if they want to appease the heart of the Japanese people, because they genuinely thought the emperor was the descendant of the sun, why they finally decided to spare him. So keep him enthroned, although without any political power, basically. So I think, yes, that's true. It's what Donald said, that it was a good decision.
Ah. Pause. Who push the pause button na, Mbak Bibit?
Wait, was I cut off?
Error, Mbak.
A little bit.
It's true what Donald said just now, that it was a good decision to let the emperor stay in his place, although without any political power, because Japanese people genuinely believed that he was the descendant of the sun. So it would be really making them heartbroken if they remove the emperor.
But I once read in some article that actually at that time American tried to humiliate the emperor by showing him to the public, and then at that first time the Japanese know that their emperor that is considered as a god is actually just a human, like short, just like them.
Short is not bad, first of all.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that one. So I think in this book it says the emperor was treated, very with respect, basically. They even shot this in a movie. The emperor and his wife was shot in a movie and shown to the public. They had breakfast and all of these things in a respected manner. So I don't know the part about they try to humiliate him.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you, Mbak Pipit.
Just short comment about Gusti. I think I once read the emperor is not humiliated, but MacArthur, the general, put his office near the emperor's palace and let the emperor come to him. So MacArthur never come to the emperor, but let the emperor come. So it's a subtle way to show who is in power now, but not humiliating.
Okay. It's in front of the public. Like people can
No,
see.
no.
Oh,
So people cannot even go near the area of the royal palace. They've never seen it inside. There are people who go there live until they die, never even see what's inside the royal palace. Like if the Japanese did not even surrender, people did not even know his voice was.
wow. Yeah, like a living God. Okay. Okay, so if there is no other question for Mbak Pipit, maybe we can move to Mr. Fajar, son of Hamas. Is it okay to record the session? You said that you don't want your presentation.
Okay, record this lah. No one watch this but us.
Yeah, it's okay lah. Just share it lah. It's not. I will try to be as natural as possible anyway.
Most controversial book of this meeting, of today's meeting.
Can I share the screen, please?
Gusti, you have to make Fajar the host so he can share the screen.
How? Aduh, lupa.
Just put
Right
him
click
as
to me.
Huh?
Right click to my face and add host gitu.
co-host.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Done?
Yes.
Okay. So let me share. Oh yeah, by the way, there's some note yeah before I start. Me reviewing this book doesn't reflect my opinion about Israel versus Palestine conflict ya.
Okay.
Then this book was published in 2010 something. May or may not be relevant to current conflict in 2023. I just respect the book, not comment too much. At least the story telling in the book is excellent, but it's quite visual. So if you are interested, it's quite grabbing story, but yeah, just take a caution lah ya. Okay, so the book is about what is the title of the book and what is it about? So this is the title of the book is Son of Hamas. Son of Hamas is the eldest young of one of the co-founder of Hamas, and maybe I will just go for this. Yeah. So basically, when he was 10 years old, he joined Shin Bet. Shin Bet is one of the Israel intelligence, like CIA versions of America. And then he worked as Israel intelligence for 10 years, but at the same time, he became the Hamas officials because, of course, he's the son of the co-founder. But he decided to stop working and escape to USA for the political asylum. And maybe the first question is that, Fajar, why do you read this book? Actually, the reason was that I randomly come across with his video about him condemning the Hamas, basically. And then I look up his name. Oh, and there is a title of the book is Son of Hamas, let's say. And actually, the most interesting point is that the rating from Goodreads is really good, 4.2. So I was like, oh, because Goodreads rating is usually much more stricter than Amazon, so I was like, maybe this book is quite interesting. Okay, and also personally, I'm not too. I don't have too much opinion about this conflict, so I was like, I'm doing this for curiosity because his background is quite interesting. The eldest son of the Hamas leader, but he become a spy at 10 years old. Come on. Okay, so I will talk about, there are actually quite a lot of points that I have. The first one is the first Intifada. The first Intifada happens when Mossad is like a very, very young. So it was the first rebellion of Palestine. And I think it's around 1990 something lah. I don't remember. He was just really, really young, and he remembered that he really had Israel a lot because Israel killed a lot of his neighbors. Israel, condemn the Palestine people a lot. They basically, Israel is the big bully, and of the Palestine people. And then he decided to buy gun, because I want to protect my family, and being having a gun is cool. And then maybe I can try to kill is another Israel, just like those famous people among those Palestinians. But then the problem is that somehow the intelligence got to know about him buying the gun, and then he get caught. I remember one of the passage in the book. Oh my God, how come I was caught? I have not even killed any Israelis yet. Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, this from our perspective, it can be quite shocking but at least at the time when in the place of such a severe conflict, maybe that is how the thinking of the people there. And then basically he was tortured and tried to question, what do you know about Hamas? So where did you get the gun and everything? But he is just 10 years old, so he's just confused. What should I say? I don't know anything, sir. But so he stayed there for about almost 1 year. And then there is one guy, one Shin Bet guy. Shin Bet is basically the CIA version of Israel. Oh yeah, actually there's a trauma in, I don't call it trauma, but maybe a shocking versions. Basically, there is some in Hamas prison. So in prison there is some camp, there is some group. So basically, maybe one of the first shocking memory from his is that the Hamas people are, torturing another Hamas people in order to get informations, and sometimes they are torturing each other for entertainment. I don't know. And so maybe that's the first thing that is shocking to him. And then he was approached by one guy who was called Loai, and then he said that, oh, I don't want to work with you. Working with you is something totally unbelievable, and out of my faith lah. But after he think, oh, maybe if I join Shin Bet, I will get a gun and I will be able to kill Israelis with the gun from Shin Bet. So maybe it's like kepolosan anak kecil kali ya. Ya udahlah, dia join aja. But then he later joined Shin Bet, but he doesn't really do anything for a couple of years until he's about a teenager or something. And then several years later, there is a Oslo agreement. Maybe, I don't know whether you know it or not, but basically there is a hope that the Palestine and and Israel can coexist. But it turned out later on the Oslo Agreement was just it doesn't happen basically. At one side, the Palestinians demanding too much, at least from the Israel perspective, and the Palestine want to return to their old land, but the old land is already occupied by the Israelis. So it's like a no solutions. And then there is a second intifada, the second rebellions. Maybe from the outsider, it seems that this conspiracy happens very naturally, but from the author's perspective, it is actually triggered by the Hamas and the Palestine Authority. So it was already designed that there was actually at first it is just a small, so just a small demonstration, but somehow it is escalated into a huge conflict. It was at first that the Hamas ordered people to do some demonstration, but somehow the Molotov involved, and then there is a gunshot, and then there are some victims, and that is the first thing that become the fire of the second Intifada, and then there is some kind of revenge because the Palestinian people feel they are hurt by that thing, so there are some suicide bomb and murders to the Israel's civilians, and then the Israel feel that, oh my God, the Hamas should be stopped, and they do bolak-balik. So it happens for about 5 years, and at first the conspiracy was only just for political purpose, and it's not supposed to be a huge 5 years long intifada. It was just a very small thing, but it become really bad. It's almost uncontrollable at all. Yeah, and even there are some of the neighbors that turn out to be suicide bombers and kill many people. It's quite scary, to be honest. And another reason why he still continued to be a Shin Bet agent was that it is because the Hamas leader has been targeted for assassinations one by one. So there's the first founder, the second, the other founder, the other leader was assassinated one by one. Even one occasion, the leader was killed by rocket from helicopter. So it's quite shocking. So the reason why he still continue becoming a Shin Bet spy was that I don't want my father to be killed, to be the next person to be assassinated. And then actually there are so many stories, but I find it can be too long. But eventually he feel that he's already sick of the constant and endless violence, because I remember that he says that it's impossible to win because what they are fighting is ideas, and ideas cannot be stopped. It cannot be controlled by curfew or anything. It will be stay alive no matter what. So yeah, eventually he tried to escape the Palestine and become political asylum in USA. Okay, so at least the lesson that I get is that the conflict is actually not as black and it is actually not as black and white, because Hamas and Israel has shedded innocent bloods as well. So yeah, not as black and white. Although of course Israel is currently on the winning side. And then from the Hamas perspective, it seems that their core belief is that they totally don't agree with the occupation with Israel, and they don't tolerate Israel occupation at all. So it seems that the solution, the two-state solution where Palestine and Israel coexist with each other is kind of impossible, considering the ideology that Hamas has. And lastly, well, I don't know. I don't see a possibility, an easy possibility for this conflict, you know. But actually, the best solution is to get the two-state solution. But it seems that because there is a continuous conflict between each other, it feels like there is no hope of forgiveness from each other lah. Jadi kayak dua-duanya saling berantem gitu. Jadi it feels like I cannot forgive them at all. So remember the blood that we have shed for so many years. Do you want to give up? Do you want to disregard those sacrifice? Right? Impossible. So the mindset is like one or zero, the zero-sum game. So yeah. So that's kind of unfortunate, you know. Yeah, but at least I learned about new thing about Palestine and Israel conflict. Okay, any question?
Any question for Mr. Fajar? Wow.
Okay, me?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, Fajar, so what kind of impression did you get after reading this? Is there a, sometimes impression is subtle. We cannot really pinpoint where exactly, but do you feel like you become more, after reading this, do you feel like you become more sympathetic towards the Israeli side then, or the other way around? So what's the strongest impression?
Actually, my impression is actually sad because they are trapped in the circle of violence, and that cannot be stopped because in one side, Hamas will not give up at all, and Israel feel that Hamas will be a constant threat. So Israel will still continue to do that no matter what, no matter the international pressure. They don't really care. And do I feel empathetic toward the Israel? Well, not really, to be honest, because they have the book clearly state that the Israel is being a big bully. They keep doing many things bad to the Israel people, to the Palestinian people. Sometimes they kill the wrong person. There is one occasion that is called the Shield Operation. So basically, there is one city, and the Israel military come to each house in that city one by one to find the person, the Hamas person. Can you imagine if that happened to our neighborhood? There's a police that come one by one for several years. It's very scary. And what I feel is that I feel really bad for the innocent people there. That's the impression that I get. Well, I don't know how to help other than sending money. But yeah.
Okay. What is the current situation of the author of this book? Like, what is his job now, or is he still in military or providing information for Israel maybe, or?
So he already stopped becoming the intelligence, but he at least I only saw him in YouTube. Basically, he become a spokesperson lah ya ya intinya. So he tried to in YouTube it shows that he condemn the Hamas, and he sometimes he tried to make a peace between Hamas and Israel, And maybe it seems like dia itu jadi figurehead lah ya, figurehead to show that this is a son of Hamas. He already turned side lah ya. At least in this video, he condemned lah. He denounced and exposed savage introductions of Palestine kids lah. For example, something like that. So I think that he became a figurehead.
Thank you for that.
Hmm.
So now he's siding with Israel. He's
Uh,
helping Israel.
I think so. I think so. Mhm. Although to be honest, if siding in Hamas as well, it's like, well, it's never-ending conflict. So I don't know why I don't exactly get it why he decided to do that. Oh yeah, he also turned from Islam to Christianity as well, because he feel that the ideology that they use in Hamas is just, you know, is too extreme, let's say. So he feel turned off by that. So he feel that Christianity is more accepting, especially accepting toward your enemy, something like that. Mhm. So he was like,
Well, Christianity is not Jewish.
Hmm?
Christianity is the Jewish. There are a lot of Palestinians who are Christian too.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Sorry, pardon, repeat.
There's nothing special about a Palestinian being Christian because I have a lot of Palestinian friends who are Christian
Yeah.
themselves.
Mm,
So what would be shocking if he converted to Judaism?
Oh
That
yeah.
would be shocking.
Yeah. But when he announced that he decided to
Convert.
become a Christian, the father is very, very incredibly sad, because the father is like the spiritual leader of Hamas, and his son live Islam. Can you imagine that? Oh my God, it's super sad, and everybody's sad in the family. Okay, good question from Yus Lukla. Maybe he's changing side because he want to choose the stronger one. Well, not exactly, because during when he was the spy in Shin Bet, actually he is quite rich. He is powerful. He has quite an influence. Even he said that he has 2 houses. He has sport car. He has many things. He has relationship with his family and everything, but he decided to give up all of them and try and become basically start from zero in USA. And it's because he's already very, very sick of the conflict that is endless, and again and again and again. Yeah. Oh yeah. Any other question?
Okay. So some weeks ago, I read the status of my friend who like to read news, and then he said Hamas is actually a fucked up organization, and that sparked some questions for me, like how could it be? Because Hamas from Muslim side, Hamas is considered as a hero in Palestine, right? But he said that he's not siding with Israel. He support Palestine, but he doesn't support Hamas even until now. And then I asked him, what do you mean by Hamas is a fuck up organization? And then he gave me a link about blowback that is already shared in the group, like how actually Hamas is actually funded by Israel to divide the power of PLO. And then at that time, I also read some articles about the son of Hamas itself, the author, and then I read that he said that some actually many Hamas leader is having a hedonism life in foreign country, and then he said about how Hamas tortured many prisoners, like they accuse some Palestinians as the informant of Israel. And then what I took is like there is no law proses hukum, good law process in processing the accusation. So they accuse people and then they tortured it in the prison, and then that's why he changing side. Did the book state about those two things?
I think the book doesn't highlight the Hamas corruption. I think at least I will answer that first. Yeah. Actually, mana ya? Actually, maybe there is a good evidence for that, because there are actually not only one son of founder that leave Hamas. Actually, there are two son of Hamas that actually leave. It is the last son of the same guy, the same father. It is the last one. So he was already, you know, helping the Hamas for so many years, but he is already fed up by the, the corruptions and the political intrigue that is happening in Hamas. So basically he just leave everything behind and just leave Hamas. But at least he doesn't leave Islam. And actually, I also read some news that there are certain case of corruption among the top leader of Hamas, and the Hamas don't really care about the Palestinian people. But I don't know. I cannot say too much about that. But at least I will focus on the book, yeah. But at least the book pinpoint the corruptions, at least from PLO. PLO is like the Fatah, the Yasser Arafat. Basically, Yasser Arafat was offered to get a really good opportunity. He was given opportunity to get 90% of the West Bank, but Yasser Arafat still don't want it, because he want all the Palestinians who was kicked out from Israel plan to be able to return to their home, for the settlement, for the refugee to return to their home. He want that, but that's the red flag for the red line of Israel. No, we cannot accept that. We will give you 90% of the West Bank, but we don't accept that. So from that point, it become no good solution. If after that, that left-wing prime minister was assassinated by an extremist, and then Netanyahu become later on Netanyahu become the prime minister, and Netanyahu is not very good to Palestine people. And also Yasser Arafat initiated the second intifada, at least from this book perspective.
And how about the Hamas? In this news, Hamas is like, what is it? News said that show that how Hamas treat Israel prisoners well. But and then I read it from the articles that the son of Hamas said that actually Hamas tortured their own people really bad in the prison. Did the book also state that?
The book was published in 2000 something, so it is like very far from 2023. I don't think that is something that is in the book. Although to be honest, I don't really believe that. I mean, maybe it's just. Maybe it's just for showing that Hamas is absolutely good, but they I don't know, they kill many innocent people for no reason as well. So I was like, oh really? Like I remember that Hamas went to the northwest of Israel city and killed 150 people who were doing festival, like for no reason. So why? So I don't. So basically, the point is that my heart goes for the Palestine people, but I cannot say much about the Hamas.
Yeah.
What else? Sorry if the book is too controversial.
Yeah, but yeah. Actually, I don't know what to believe anymore in this in the Israel versus Palestinian conflict, because like there's so many propaganda and then there's
Exactly.
hoax and fake news, something like that. And I was like, which one is actually right? I'm still like, many things have to be confirmed, many things have to be read, and all.
Yeah, actually, I don't follow that too much. It's just maybe kind of unproductive if we do it too much. Do not want to ask question or anyone else?
Want to give comment about Hamas. So the only thing I'm disappointed with them is that they never hold another election. So it's really hard to tell for real whether Palestinians still want to be governed by Hamas or not. So the only election they've ever done was in the 1990s. I don't remember, it was 97 or something, right? So I wish they have regular elections so we know for sure whether Palestinians really want Hamas to be their governor or not. So yeah, so I think they do not like dictatorship on both sides. So that's what I don't like about Hamas. However, for the Palestinians, there's no one else fighting for their uh, freedom other than Hamas. I think that's the only one they knew. Is there anyone else fighting for the freedom of Palestinians? No one else. That's why it's also somehow understandable if these Palestinians also supported them. Although I definitely have heard of the leaders of Hamas actually do not even live there, do not even live in Palestine and in Palestine. They live overseas with such a lavish lifestyle. So yeah, I think it's a common public secret about that. So yes, I wish we know what the Palestinian people wanted. So maybe they don't want Hamas to be governed. Maybe they want government who work on the two-state solution rather than, like militaristic view of how to solve the problem. So yeah, that's the only thing I wish happened in Palestine.
Yeah. Actually, the best solution for now is the two-state solution, although regardless how imperfect that is, because if it's not two solution, the only solution is one state solution. Then you can guess which state that is. Okay, anyone else?
So do you think that the rumor World War III will be started from Israel and Palestinian conflict?
It's kind of too far, but I don't think so, because everybody is in the Middle East. Most of them are struggling politically and economically. The Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Afghan. Arab doesn't really care. Yemen, many of them are very unstable, and they don't want to be involved in anything at all. They are already busy with them, and they don't want to get any refugee as well from the Palestine. So yeah, they don't want to get them to be involved at all. Maybe Iran, but Iran is kind of too far away. They only do proxy war.
Okay.
Hopefully not lah, yeah. Nobody want that in the Middle East. It doesn't beneficial.
Well, the Arab countries do not want to get involved because they are American allies. They wanted to, but because before Arab countries became American allies, they used to attack Israel. Because, if they wanted to, they could have. But since they became the allies, part of the allies, then they cannot.
Yeah,
Takes time.
that one as well. That one as well.
Fajar, I have a question. I finally able to join. I was able.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry for being late. I listened some parts of your discussions. Yeah, after you read the whole book, you contemplated, you discussed, Fajar. So, what are the golden nuggets or the wisdom that you learned? So, things like this are never, ever, ever going to touch our country, and we are never going to be divided like this again, because based on history, David de Impera, I mean, it was such a very effective way to divide people in the country and to conquer that area. And that can happen again in Indonesia. It happened during the colonization. So, because when this happened, I was concerned about Indonesia, because when I saw people doing rallies in the streets for Palestine and everything, I got scared because I saw it in front of me. And that was not the first time, because before the pandemic, when I was going to help Mbak Imung launching her book, I couldn't get through the road because there were also people doing rallies for Palestine. So this has been going on for ever. But I think it's getting what you call that, this Davide et Impera is happening in the whole world. And I'm worried about Indonesia because we have like 700 languages and like thousands of races and everything. We are very vulnerable. So what have you learned? So this is not going to happen in this country, that our Islam is not going to be like Hamas. And the other parts also are not going to be like Israel, because it's like everybody who likes Western thing are considered, oh, the Israel part. I was in Shia for 7 years. So whenever on Friday, I attended Friday prayer because it's an obligatory for women and men to attend Friday prayers. Or for 7 years, the Iranian, the Shia, they always condemn, oh, laknatullah, America, laknatullah, Israel. That's what they said. And I was confused. But now I understand why. So it's a proxy war between Iran and Israel and things like that. So how can we avoid this kind of dogma, this kind of fundamentalism, this kind of fanatism of Islam, divide and conquer Indonesia? Because if you see in Aceh, it happened, and they didn't want to take the refugees from Rohingya. And I took the refugees from Palestine, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and they are not easy to handle, these refugees.
Yeah.
So how can we prevent this to happen in this country and our Islam stays the peaceful Bhinneka Tunggal Ika? That's what I want to ask.
Okay, so the answer is that we need to kill the seed from the start. The reason why Hamas grow, at least from what I know, is that it start from Islamic Brotherhood, Islamic apa ya bahasa Indonesia ya, Islamic Brotherhood lah ya. So Islamic Brotherhood, they try to do coup d'etat in Egypt. They fail. They try to coup d'etat in Syria.
Ikhwanul Islam.
Yeah, Ikhwanul Islam. So,
Muslim Brotherhood.
Muslim Brotherhood. Yeah. They try to coup d'etat in Egypt, fail. I think in Jordan or Syria, fail again. And that route come to the Palestine, and they feel that the Islamic Brotherhood is the one that can be the protector of the Palestine from the Israels. And then, and then maybe Israel supported the this new movement as a way to oppose Fatah, but somehow Israel is playing with fire, playing with an ideology that is quite dangerous, at least from Israel perspective, but it grows very well. So in Indonesia, at least, we need to be aware of those aliran that is promoting new state, extremist side, and kayak new NII maybe NII golongan, pokoknya mereka pengen bikin Indonesia baru lah, Indonesia dengan government yang baru. And they doesn't want to follow the current government system. Those are the dangerous type, and then those are the most conspiracy type of person. So yeah, I think that's the case.
Yeah, because my mom told me the story when the ITIE took place in her hometown in the West Java. It was scary. They were like the most nastiest, the meanest people on earth in comparison to the Dutch colonization, the DITI, Darul Islam, in my mom's one, it was in Salawu, Singaparna, like an hour from Tasik and Garut, where the person who spread Islam, Sheikh Yusuf, was actually, her cemetery is in a Hindu temple, Candi Cangkuang. I went there and I had a spiritual experience talking to him. I know I often get this kind of experience through dreams, through when I visit cemeteries. And the guy who works there says that his message is Hindu and Islam are brothers. There is no Islam. He doesn't want the country of Islam. No. So my mom said they kills everybody. They just want power. So I think that's the danger of having majority of Muslims here. There is a place where people feel, because I was a minority in US, majority was Christian, but they're not fanatic. That's what I felt. But here, I'm beginning to feel like the Muslims becoming more fanatic, fundamental, and like people are proud wearing a long hijab. And if someone is not praying 5 times, they're judging and things like that. And if you say Arabic and the Sharia, it's like you're Saleh and Saleha.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit, especially after the rally, I was there, I got scared. When I see the Palestine flags, I just got goosebumps and I couldn't walk, I got really scared. And I think this trauma is a bit, because I've been through many things and I see that it can happen here. So I really hope it's not happening. Yeah, so.
Okay, the first thing, the
Okay,
fine line
sorry.
is that
We only have 10 minutes left, and
yeah.
actually 7 minutes, but Gusti has not even presented her book.
Gusti, go on.
Yeah.
So my turn now. So I'll be very fast. Well, I will present about this Toto Chan's Children, A Goodwill Journey to the Children of the World. Anak-anak Toto Chan, Perjalanan Kemanusiaan untuk anak-anak di dunia. So actually, this is the second book. So have you ever heard about the first book, Toto Chan, Gadis Kecil di Jendela? Toto Chan's. So the first book is considered as like the book. I heard that it's one of the books that changed the education paradigm in Japan, and it was taught from the perspective of a girl named Tetsuko Kuroyanagi, which is called by Toto Chan. So maybe she has like ADHD or something like that, or maybe like learning disability, because she was she had difficulties in concentrating, always like disturbing her class. But then and then after that he was kicked from the school, and then she was accepted in a school, in a unique school that is in gerbong kereta api, in locomotive. So the classroom is the gerbong kereta api in the train, named Tomoe Gakuen. And in the school, the children come to the school, and then they can choose the schedules. So what they want to learn, and the teacher will teach them the lesson that they like. So it's really student oriented at that time, and it was really unique. And at that time, no other school like that. But after that, and she experienced a really beautiful childhood in that school, Tomoe Gakuen. But then after that, when the World War II start, the school was bombed. So the school was bombed and never be built again. And then Toto-chan have to move to other school. But the memories of the childhood that her experience in the school, she brought it until she's grown up. No, and she is now an actress and also an activist. She once chosen as ambassador of UNICEF, and she's now 90 years old. So this is the author, Tetsuko Kuroyanagi, Toto-chan. And the second book is telling the story when she's already growing up, and chosen as the ambassador, humanity ambassador from UNICEF, from 1984 until 1997. And at that time, she was traveling to many countries in Asia and in Africa, which is Tanzania, Nigeria, India, Mozambique, Cambodia, and Vietnam, Angola, Bangladesh, Iraq, Ethiopia, Sudan, Rwanda, Haiti, and Bosnia. No Palestine here. No Palestine here. Too bad. And what I take from this, why I decide to read this book, because I like the first book so much, and I want to know what happened to Toto-chan after she's already growing up. And then while the first book is really fun, really cute, about the childhood moments, the second book is really gruesome and sad, because it that told us about the many conflicts in Asia and in Africa. And I was like, I was born in 89, so I was a 90s generation. And at my time, my memories is full of many beautiful moments in my childhood. Like I saw many TV programs, animations, like I saw Sailor Moon, Doraemon, and I saw many movies that's really funny, Tom and Jerry. And then there are video games. I have fun with video games. I have fun with comics, with many children books. I have favorite snacks, favorite music, and really beautiful. But at the same time, in the other country, the memories of the 80s generation, 90s generation, in these countries are busung lapar, famine, and then drought, long drought, kekeringan, and then war, civil war, apartheid, having your limb cut, or because there is a bomb blow up and blow your body, and having your parents are killed by your own neighbors. It's really what's like so different. Like we live in the same time, we live in the same world, but really different condition. And I was like, oh my God, so scary. And I was like, I thank God for my simple life in Indonesia, because I cannot imagine if I was fated as the children of Bosnia, maybe, or children of Rwanda. It's really scary. And when she had her journey towards this country, so she came to those children, to many children. Many of them were parentless. She collected stories, and then she brought photographers, and then she published the story in news. And then after that, the public of Japan was touched by the stories, by her journey, and then collecting donations to those countries. So it's like a big movement. So in Tanzania, in Nigeria, she can collect like some millions yen, and then help the Nigeria people to, what is it, to build water, to saluran air ya, to build saluran air for their country, to overcome the problems. And what the other takeaway from this book is like, I cannot imagine like how cruel the grown up can be, like how evil people can be, because like in Bosnia, like they are deliberately targeted children, like they are toys, like dolls, toys. That is really interesting for the children, right? And they put bomb in those toys, so they make those children interested in that toys, brought it with them, and then blew it up. And I was like, how could they do that? How could they think something like that towards children? And then after that, also some adult ask the children to walk towards the land of mine. So like they make those children like a living bomb detector. And I was like, how could they think something like that? And it was so scary. And oh my god, I cannot. Oh my god. And like after reading this book, I was like a simple thing, like I have water, I can wash my clothes, I can drink, I can take wudu. And this I keep thinking like, if I live it at those country, I cannot do this. Like this, like I will only have a limited source of water. I cannot wash my body. I cannot drink. I cannot wash my clothes. I feel like so luxury. Water is so luxury here, because in this country that is have long drought. Uh, those those children have to go like so many kilometers just to have waters, and the waters is muddy, and they drink that water, and they even like they offer the water to Tetsuko Kuroyanagi, although they only have really little water for themselves, but they still think about other. And it makes Toto-chan like the super like want to cry, like oh my god, like she said like these children is believing us, like if the adult are suffering, we are suffering, we are crying, we are shouting or suffering, like we are suffering, an adult, but those children, they're suffering in silence. They don't speak at all. They can only believe the adult that is unfortunately cannot be believed, because they can do monstrous thing, like yeah, make having them taking the bomb in the toys, something like that. And it's really like, oh my god. And then like in Cambodia, they took the babies, and then they mutilate the babies, and then put the bodies on the trees. It was like, oh my god, how come people so devil, so evil, something like that. And yeah, some of the country, thankfully some of the country already changed the situation, like in Ethiopia. in 92, Ethiopia have a long drought and famine, busung lapar everywhere. But now, I once read that Ethiopia is already a good country, and then they are prosper in agriculture because of technology from Israel. And I was like, oh yeah, situations change, but like this is like a note in history that how human can be destructive towards other people, even towards children, something like that. Yeah, that's all from my book. Yeah, and is there a question I like to discuss? Maybe maybe it's just a rhetorical question, but if you can answer it, maybe you once read about the news, like
Sorry guys, my student is here, so I need to go.
oh yeah.
But keep it on, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Pipit.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, can we take photo first?
You can take picture first.
Yes. Sorry ya, Gilang. Bentar ya.
Who will take this?
Yeah. Kak Mita, do you want to take photo? I mean, you just turn on your camera. Dono, are you taking photo?
What did you say, Pipit?
Turn on your camera, Kak. Take photo. One. Dono, count. Dono.
Sorry, my yeah, because my laptop is not designed for this.
Sorry, I'm
One,
using tab.
two. Okay, one
Okay.
more time. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Happy New Year! Merry
Well, you
Christmas!
can stay. Only me, I'm going. But
I thought
yeah.
you're not
Yeah,
the.
sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, continue, Gusti.
Okay. So well, I'm just questioning like when because she already went to Bosnia at 1996. Like why didn't she go to Palestine, like Palestine? Yeah, just questioning like that, just rhetorical question like that.
Gusti, can I give a comment?
Yes.
I met somebody from Bosnia in Bali during Ubud Readers Writers Festival, and he
Yes.
said that during the war, Bosnia and Serbia, I think, every day he just wake up and he holds a gun, and whoever attacks the country, he just attacks back. So during the 4 years, every day he killed people, and he doesn't. And after the war, he doesn't remember anything about killing people. He doesn't know how many people he killed. He doesn't know why he killed. He just did this automatically like robots. That's what happens in the war. And he finally went to India to cleanse his soul. And he said it took him like 25 years to finally heal from that war. That's the trauma. So if you say about how can they use children, this is the thing when this Palestine and Israel war, because I've heard so many bad stories about children from war. These children from this area of war are usually traded for pedophiles. So when I heard that you said that it's used for bombing and everything, it's not strange anymore, because wars are the place where the women are traded for trafficking, human trafficking, for prostitutes, and the children for pedophiles. And probably now I know there's another function for testing the bombs and everything. So that's why I said that I'm worried that this can affect Indonesia. because I've seen the refugees from Iraq, from Afghanistan, sleeping on the street from 3 months when I was working for USAID. And the mother could not speak Bahasa Indonesian or English, and the translator told me that the mother asked me to adopt her 3 children because the father is separated from the mother during the trip on the boat. And that was like human trafficking. I could have just taken the children and sold the children because, but I mean, I couldn't. So I told my clients to put them in the house. But the funny thing, the men are in the house, but the woman and the children were sleeping on the street for 3 months without roof, without food, without protection. And that's what's happening in the war. So Gusti, you will see worse thing coming after this Palestine-Israel war in Indonesia, because believe it or not, Indonesia is a favorite place for refugees, especially the Muslim refugees. I met a lot of refugees from Palestine, and they're very traumatized. And when they're angry, they take it out on us. So that's one thing that this country is going to face after this war. So believe me, it's gonna happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because there's many videos like spot like the passions of the Palestine, like how strong they are, even though they lost their home, they lost their parents, they lost their treasures, something like that, the materials, but they still can be patient and still worship God. And yeah, it keeps it they are kept showing at the at news, yeah, like how many people touch uh, 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 are touched by their patients. But then I'm questioning, like it's like a glorification of those victims. Like I'm sure, like not all victims or that patient. Like I saw some other side, like so many of them like hysterical, like why this happened, God? And like was they have depression, and then the women in Palestine have to eat pills to delay their menstruation because it's really hard for them to find tampon. Like like it's not glory at all, but many people like glorify it, like this is what Palestine, like they are so strong, they are so patient. And so I was like yeah, like people like this kind of story, like, right, they like to see other people having a having bad things but still can be strong, still like thriving, still fight. They like those kind of stories, but actually, like, not all the cases are like that, and it's like a glorification of the suffering in those wars. Yeah. Oh my God.
I think we all are affected by this war. Yeah, and I think for me, you are frustrated with the children. And if you heard that my friend works for the children for like victim of pedophiles, a
Hmm.
baby is used by a pedophile for a sex object. 8 months. Can you imagine that? And that's why when the
Can
war
you
started,
make it not too visual, please?
no, we have to be frank. That's what the war causes. So this is ugly. And make love no war. That's why I'm very scared.
Okay. But at least from our meeting today, something that I learned is that peace and stability is and regular peaceful day is actually something that we take for granted, right?
Exactly.
It's not sometimes it's a luxury for other people.
It
The,
is.
the regular boring day is a luxury for other people. So
Yeah, you're right. The boring day, the rain, And I just found out in Egypt, they don't have rain, not even one day during their lives. So we didn't have rain for a month, and we complained so much like we were in hell, it was so hot. So now when there is a rain, even sprinkles, I go, oh my God, this is heaven, thank you. Yeah, you're right. You're right. We should be really grateful for our peace, stability, unity, and diversity. So we're all equal in the eyes of God. And I'm just, after this war, it's just like maybe that's what God wants to teach us. Be grateful for this that we usually take for granted. Yeah.
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 Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, Gusti?
No, I think it's
No.
in.
Okay then. So I think that's all for today. And thank you. Oh yeah, you are the host, by the way. Can you close it?
Well, okay, thank you for your attention and thank you for your effort to present this book. Thank you for your participation. And hopefully we can see you all next meetings with other interesting and inspiring books. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Happy New Year.
Bye.
Year.